So I will talk a lot about Masters of Work and what you guys, have put out, but let's scale it back a little bit. I want to talk about New York City just because obviously that's where the Red Bull Music Academy is going to be this year, and that's where you both grew up. Can you talk about, what was it like growing up in New York City in the 70s and then in the 80s, like musically, culturally, and like how did that, affect, what you guys eventually started doing with DJing and production?
Well, being in New York, actually being in Brooklyn, I was surrounded by a lot of different styles of music. I'm from Sunset Park, which was primarily Puerto Rican. Next to me, I had Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, which is all Italian. Further up, it was a Jewish area. To my left, it was, African American, Jamaican. So I was like in the middle of all that. So I had reggae on one side, I had Italian stuff on the other, electro and, alternative stuff, rock, and then my area. So, growing up to all of that was just, that's where I learned about breaks and learned about different styles of music, you know what I mean? So, and then being Puerto Rican, my pop, all he played was Latin music, which I hated as a kid, because I was just like, that's my parents' music and, the old folk music. But later on, as I began, got into production and started to understand music as a whole, I got into it, and the arrangements and all that kind of stuff, so.
And Louie, you came from a musical family, correct?
Yeah, I was born in the Bronx, and I was raised on Stratford Avenue, which is right at the heart of where hip-hop was born. Right down the block was Bronx River Projects, and there was Africa Bambaataa, Jazzy J, Red Alert, Africa Islam, and it was actually, Jazzy J was the first known DJ that I knew, just a very famous DJ that took me under his wing when I was a kid. And at the same time, I had an uncle who was a very famous salsa singer. His name is Hector Lavoe, and he's on Fania Records, and he was on one of the Fania All-Stars, and, I would see him walking in my house at like 4 in the morning and bringing a little test pressing of 45 or one of his like records that became like a huge hit in the next 6 months, So, that was in the family all the time, and my father played sax, and he listened to a lot of Miles Davis, John Coltrane, and he played jazz and also in a lot of the Latin local bands and Latin jazz bands. And my sisters were disco queens. They went to like Studio 54, The Loft, Paradise Garage, and they used to go out with a lot of like dudes and gangs that were like DJs. So they would bring home all this music I never heard on the radio. Because I grew up listening to anything from Elton John to Steely Dan to Stevie Wonder, Quincy Jones, and all that. A lot of pop music at the time, and I heard all this great dance music that wasn't the disco music that was on the radio. It was this other style, and I was like, what is this fusion, And it ended up being loads of the classics that we play today, A lot of records you only heard in places like the Loft or the Paradise Garage. So the combination of all those things, I guess, has been reflecting on me all these years.
Did you start going into those scenes as well? Like once you got old enough, did your sisters let you tag along to the clubs?
Yeah, first of all, when I was a kid, I used to be in the car dropping them off in the front of the club. So imagine you see this chaos, like, 1,000 people in front of a club trying to get in. You hear the boom, boom, outside, and then I got to go back home. I would drop them off. So with another person in the car who was driving. So, it was a big tease for a long time, but I finally got to go in 1980 to the Paradise Garage. And that's where I first heard Larry Levan, and it just changed up the whole, game of, I really wanted to be a club DJ at the time.
When you hear names like Larry Levan and people talk about Paradise Garage, they've achieved this like mythical status, and, they're almost terms that people throw around that, obviously never went there, and, but since you were there, was it as good as everyone says? Like, what was the night like at the Paradise Garage with Larry Levan?
Well, first I have to say that I've never ever heard a sound system that can beat the Paradise Garage. It was an amazing sound system. It was in a room that was treated. I mean, they took something empty like this and built the club within that room, in this big square. And then you had Larry Levan, who was this musical genius. I mean, you know, he started like all of us. I think he was a light man or something, and the DJ didn't show up, and he just started playing. You know, but he had a great taste for music, you know, and sound, you know. And then you have Richard Long, who's the creator of these sound systems that you see that started like a Ministry of Sound. I mean, you got to imagine in New York City at that time, there were about 20 Ministry of Sounds. So imagine clubs with sound systems like that. And anywhere you went, the DJs were amazing. They were playing great music, and it sounded great. But the Paradise Garage became like the blueprint, and the Loft, even before the Paradise Garage, because the Loft was like in 1970 or whatever. I mean, I wasn't around at those times. I'd be a little older. You know, my sisters went to those places. They're like 10 years older than me. And I was the little kid just like watching them and checking things out. So, but the Paradise Garage was a magical place. The lighting system, I mean, the sound. I mean, he didn't even use monitors. He had he didn't use headphones. He had like Bose speakers that were like his headphones. It was weird. I would never be able to play like that. And he was able to, he wasn't a super technical guy, but he definitely created an atmosphere and made those records sound amazing and knew what to play after what. And there were no musical boundaries. Like, he would play something that was influenced by rock, something that was influenced by, jazz, or it could have been, it just went all around the scope. He just had an open mind for music. But it was all danceable. That was it, And I just saw this interview, because Lenny Fontana. I don't know if you guys know, but you should check this out. I think his dad used to work at a radio station or something, and he recorded some interviews from Larry Levan. And when you hear him talk, I mean, you could tell he was definitely way ahead of his time. But it definitely was magical. It was a great time. That's it. I mean, I think today there's other good times, and it's a world now. It's a world of. It's not just New York, it's all around the world. And now you have, kids from around the world making the music that's inspired by that sound and other sounds that became. It is part of the roots of dance music and New York in general with hip hop as well.